I'm recording in progress, it says. Okay, so that's my cue to let you all know that this is being recorded. So just a quick reminder, keep your mics off to kind of help with that feedback. And just so you know, if anybody wants to view this after the fact, it is recorded and will be on our Whitburn Center YouTube channel. So feel free to check it out there for some review after the fact. But again, welcome. My name is Renee Christensen. I'm a research assistant with the Whitburn Center, as well as an MPA candidate with UW-Oshkosh MPA program. We're really happy to have you guys with us today. And we're gonna kind of lead into our welcome, which Reggie is here to kind of kick us off with. So go ahead, Reggie.
Awesome. Thank you, Renee. I'm Reggie Parson. Just before, I continue to go forward, I'm an MPA alum of UW-Oshkosh, graduated in 2016, and I'm really happy to be here. And I just want to thank everyone for joining this forum today. And before I go on, I also just want to give a little background about the Whitburn Center. So as you know, the Whitburn Center was established last fall in 2021 through a generous donation from our founding benefactor, UW alumni Jerry Whitburn. Our mission is to conduct nonpartisan, practical, applied research focused on evaluating and improving governance, professional management, and public policy in Wisconsin and beyond. Our vision is to also build local government, nonprofit, and community capacity to promote the common good. To do this work, it certainly requires people bringing people together in spaces like this to work together to share knowledge and equip public professionals with tools and resources to better understand the dynamic topic areas surrounding Wisconsin's public sector. We're happy to have you join all of us and learn alongside you. And with that, on to this week's topic, which would be tips and tricks for grant writing in the public and nonprofit sector.
Thank you so much, Reggie. That was a wonderful introduction. My name is Beth, and I am in the MPA program as well. And I'm also the MPA graduate assistant. So I would just like to start out by introducing our presenters for today. So today we have Erin Schultz-Wege, who is the Executive Director of SOAR Fox Cities. Erin grew up in Campbellsport, Wisconsin, and earned a master's degree in social work from the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay and the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh Collaborative MSW program in 2014. She also holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Marian University in Fond du Lac and is a graduate of the Nonprofit Leadership Institute and holds nonprofit leadership certificates from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire and the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Prior to joining SOAR Fox Cities as their executive director, Erin served as the executive director of Hope House of Manitowoc County for nearly 7 years, leading the organization through a capital campaign in increasing net assets by 37%, while driving total annual income up by 68%. Erin has dedicated her professional life to nonprofit leadership, with special skills in grant writing and management, having worked in various roles prior to SOAR and Hope House for the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin, and leading various federal, state, and programs in Milwaukee along the Lakeshore with Attic Correctional Services, and leading the Crisis Housing Community Service Department of Lakeshore Community Action Program in Manitowoc, and served as the special consultant to the Haven of Manitowoc County Board of Directors as they opened the first homeless shelter for men in the Manitowoc Two Rivers area. As the executive director of SOAR Fox Cities, Erin drives the strategic development and operations implementation for the organization. This includes driving fundraising, grant writing, management, and overseeing marketing and leading a team of 14 employees, ensuring that all programs work to fulfill the SOAR's mission of empowering people with differing abilities. Erin has written and secured millions of dollars in state, federal, and foundation grants, and will share that she is especially passionate about grant writing and management. Erin is a member of the Appleton Rotary Club, serving on its board of directors since 2020, and has served in various additional board volunteer roles with a number of nonprofits throughout Northeast Wisconsin. Erin and her husband, David, live in Fond du Lac and enjoy spending time outdoors with their 2 black labs, Guinness and Priya, and taking advantage of everything that the Northern Kettle Moraine has to offer. Thank you, Erin. Our co-host or our co-presenter today is Jess Wild, and she is the Communication and Economic Development Director for the City of West Bend. Jess grew up in LeSueur, Minnesota. She earned a master's degree in public administration from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, a master's degree in integrated marketing and communications from Eastern Michigan University, and a bachelor's degree in communication and art from the College of St. Benedict University. Prior to her work for the City of West Bend, Jess served 3 years as marketing director for the Museum of Wisconsin Art and 7 years in recruitment marketing director roles for Mount Mary University in Milwaukee and Northland College in Ashland. Jess also has experience in marketing agency setting as a senior account executive and subcontractor. Jess's role at the City of West Bend consists of internal and external communications, organization grant writing, economic and business development, marketing, and more. She is the executive director of the Downtown Business Improvement District Board and serves the West Bend Tourism Commission. And she is a member of the Communications Advisory Board for Mount Mary University. She enjoys volunteering for area nonprofit organizations and special events. Jess and her husband Tanner live in Slinger and have 2 children, Marshall 8 and Mitchell 6. Thank you, Jess. Okay, so today's kind of form is going to be a little bit different than our Wednesdays in the past, and we're going to do just kind of a question and answer session, and just, you know, to have just a nice flowing conversation. So we'll ask some questions, but please feel free to put more questions in the chat, or you're also welcome to raise your hand and then we can unmute you and ask questions that way.
All right, so without further ado, we'll get down to the questions, which you're all here for. So we'll start with you, Erin. So please tell us about your current role and your past career experiences.
Absolutely. So as Beth currently shared, I'm the executive director at Store Fox Cities. We're a small to mid-sized nonprofit located in Appleton. We serve 3 counties, and our primary mission is to empower people living with varying abilities, So primarily individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. I've been in nonprofit leadership for about 15 years. One of my first roles was in a leadership level where I was, and I think it's very applicable, kind of tossed into grant writing without knowing much of what I was getting myself into. Aside from everything that Beth shared, I've also been involved in providing grant consultation services, including readiness assessments. I've worked with a consulting firm, and I've done some contract grant writing for other nonprofits that worked with that firm.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Jess, same question.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me today. I'm pleased to be here. Like you said, my name is Jess Wilds. I'm the Director of Communications and Economic Development for the City of West Bend. I started my role here in January of 2022. I was hired on by the city administrator to develop a communications department for the city. And it quickly took shape in advance of the pandemic, and I'm glad it did because we really needed it. And has expanded and evolved significantly since then. Just within about 6 months of that time, it expanded to encompass economic development activities for the city. So I do a lot of work with our development team, our community development team, recruiting new businesses, helping retain them. I do a lot of visits to manufacturers in the city. I work with our small businesses. I'm the executive director of our Downtown Business Improvement District Board, which is our historic downtown Main Street area and other sort of surrounding streets and businesses. And I really enjoy that aspect of the work. And then the role also consists of tourism, promotion, internal, external communications, public relations. So it is very broad. We do have a great team. I oversee our community television division, and it all really interrelates to one another as our department has kind of grown and adjusted over the last few years. Before working at the city of West Bend, I worked at the Museum of Wisconsin Art in West Bend, and that's how I got basically exposed to local government. I worked a lot with our downtown bid and tourism commission, and there was a lot of overlap there, but have done grant writing for many years. I started doing grant writing when I worked in higher ed, and that's really where I got started in general, working in higher education, marketing roles specifically, and way up in Ashland, Wisconsin, and then coming down to Milwaukee, several years ago now. That was about 10 years ago now. And we can talk more about the grant writing experience soon, but it is definitely something that's a major part of this position and so important to our organization.
Thank you. And both of you kind of already mentioned this, but Jess, if you could start out, or if you can continue and just kind of give us a little bit more information on how you got into grant writing.
Sure. I'm not sure how Erin got started, but she kind of alluded to just getting thrown into it. The most memorable experience of getting started, I guess, was when I started. I mean, I know I did some smaller grants in higher ed, but sort of the more larger grant that we actually were successful in getting was when I was started at the Museum of Wisconsin Art. I think I started on a Friday and the grant was due on Monday, and we had to craft an entire marketing plan for the upcoming summer. It was January at that time, and it was sort of that moment of just being completely thrown in. We got to get this done, figure it out. So I've always been interested in writing and have enjoyed writing, and that really came in hand. And I had experience crafting marketing plans. So fortunately, we were able to put it together. But I would not recommend that as a great practice, doing a grant over 2 days, mainly over a weekend, without knowing any team members or the vision of the programs or anything that were involved. But we really made it work, and everybody was scrappy. But that was sort of the jump start into grant writing. From that experience on, especially in nonprofit and in the public sector, I mean, it's really critical to look for those funding sources that are available. So from then on, I've done so many grants. I don't know how many, but especially in this role here for the city, we do a lot of grant writing for economic development, working with Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. I do a lot of administering grants and, managing the reports and making sure that everybody is on the same page with timelines and auditors and whatever needs to get done. But I do try to mainly work on the front end. So finding grants, aligning them with our projects, and then writing them. So at the city, we also do, we've been successful recently with the Neighborhood Investment Fund grant. That was an opportunity presented through the Department of Administration. And this is a grant that I wrote with another partner here at the city. She is a project manager of our downtown Riverwalk project. And she was really the content expert on the details of the project. And I definitely recommend finding that person if that's not already you, and being able to know some of the details of what this project is, and then working to relate them back to the notice of funding and their priorities. So we wrote this grant back in the winter, and we're successful in getting $2.6 million to complete a Riverwalk project in our downtown. It's just a really transformational project. Super proud of it. But yeah, so that's just kind of the start. We've done dozens and dozens of grants in the last couple of years here at the city of West Bend.
That's awesome, Jess. Erin, same question.
So quite similar. I alluded to the fact I was I was very much thrown into grant writing. In one position, it was, hey, I think I was on board for two to 3 weeks at the time. And my immediate supervisor, our executive director at the time, was like, hey, we have to submit this and I'm going to need you to write it. That is probably the least traumatic grant entry experience I've had. In one role, I was on board for 2 days, similar to Jess, and had to submit a grant that was about 360 pages. I mean, it was a manual by the time it was done, and it was in the day when things were still paper and USB, and we had to hand deliver it. So, that's where it started. Throughout that, though, I happened to find out that I enjoy writing. So I did not go into the nonprofit sector necessarily to become a grant writer. I entered the nonprofit sector, as many do, because they want to change lives, make the world a better place, help people. And just in being in leadership roles, I happen to learn that I really enjoy grant writing. I really enjoy the research element of grant writing and finding that content creator if I am not that person or that expert content creator. And then throughout my roles and my growth professionally, it has just more or less followed and become a necessity of what I've been doing. As I grew in leadership roles, especially in smaller nonprofits, the executive director is chief cook and bottle washer, which means they're often the grant researcher, the grant writer, the grant initiator and implementer. And then, they're also doing the follow-up, data collection, so on and so forth. So it just so happened that I was given the opportunity to grow. Some of my experience also allowed me to work with different kinds of grants. In working for a community action program, our funding streams were so diverse that we were writing to not only state entities and federal level entities, but we were also soliciting from small local foundations, large statewide foundations. And all of those grants kind of take, a different format for submission and a little different path each. And as I moved along, because I knew I enjoyed it, I intentionally sought out opportunities to continue building my skills through training, seminars, and more writing. In all honesty, continuing to write and continuing to submit grants is the best way to become better, in my opinion.
Thank you both. On to the next question. So Erin, we'll start with you. What is your kind of grant seeking process?
Absolutely. So taking a step back from just the writing or research, something that's really important is making sure that your organization is grant ready. Because it's great to get the money. It's great to get an approval. However, if you can't promise to do, or if you can't do what you promise to do, that's going to be a huge issue for your organization, and it's going to be far more stressful than just trying to get the money. So first step is making sure that you have the capacity to implement what you're writing in that grant. And then, in my opinion, once grant ready, then what I do is I am looking to my local, like what is within the city, county, state that I can access. So community foundations, private foundations. One great resource that I've used to find foundation grants in the state of Wisconsin is Marquette University's Rayner Library has a Foundations in Wisconsin book. They used to actually publish it and you could purchase it. I think it might be 100% online now. In the beginning, when I was working to find new foundations and new foundation grants, that was a great resource. Most, I think, university libraries also have a funding information network. My office is located 2 blocks from Lawrence University in Appleton, so we have the benefit of accessing that fin through them. And then once I've gleaned all of the information that I possibly can about foundations, that exists, community foundations, so on and so forth. Then I look to my local companies. In the past several years, social responsibility has become, a pinpoint for companies. So many, especially larger companies, have their own foundations. Sometimes they're held at local community foundations, which is the case in the Fox Valley. Sometimes they have their own foundation. So those are the primary places that I'm going to start looking. And it's important to note that those are all foundation grants. If I am looking for state grants, federal grants, very tailored grants to the services that I'm providing, I'm going to look to the entities that lead those services at the state level or federal level. So for disability services, for example, I look at the Administration for Community Living. It's a federal entity designed to enhance services for older adults and individuals living with disabilities, and they regularly send out grant opportunities and RFPs. If you haven't heard RFP, it's a request for proposal. There's some jargon in the grant world too. And so I get myself on all sorts of listservs. I probably get 50 to 75 emails a week that are only from those listservs. And it is because that's where they send out their funding opportunities, and that's where I can learn about them on the front end.
Yeah, I can chime in. Same. I mean, my process is really similar. I sometimes start local. We have a really, our community foundation has some major organizations tied to it in West Bend, but it's also administered through the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. So, I mean, the relationships with individuals in West Bend and Milwaukee are critical in keeping, because if we have a project coming up and we need funding, like they're my first call, because local and more regional grants are, at least in my experience, have been more obtainable. They're a little less competitive because you're not competing at a national scale, you're competing with projects that are a little more in your sphere. So if your project can, align with their mission and their goals, it's going to be such a better chance of getting there. So, basically I start, at least at the city, is we talk with our department head team, or maybe it's my own department with economic development needs, is what's the project? Like, what do we need? So recently we just did a couple of grants for infrastructure projects that we have ahead. We have them planned in our capital budget, but we'd really like to offset the cost of them so that we can do other capital projects, or do an even better project. So, for that instance, I'll have the project in mind and go from there. Look at, all right, DOT is the one that would probably have the most funding available for an infrastructure project. So I'll look at it on the state level, look at it on the federal level. And then, really just searching. You can search through grants.gov. We do a lot of work in there. It can be really overwhelming though. So it helps to have a sense of really what you're looking for, and the criteria. And then also, there are other partners that you can work with to help keep you in, kind of in the know. Like Erin, I follow tons of listservs. So like WEDC, they send emails out all the time. Here's an update on different funding, and we read them and we explore them, and, I don't just delete them. And it's like an active follow, and sometimes they'll all of a sudden have a grant pop up and it's like, you've got 6 weeks or 4 weeks. And so we go for it. Like there were a few during the pandemic that were like ARPA funds that popped up really fast. Like there was a travel stimulus grant program, and it was maybe announced over a 3-week period of time. So you can miss it really fast. So it's just kind of staying up on it. I also am really active on social media and follow other municipalities. And when they're announcing grants that they've received, I'm trying to take note of them for, projects that might be coming up for us that would align. So it's really just kind of being really active and, trying to get out on those local networks, make sure your CEO or those funders. Like we won't want them to know you on a first name basis, or at least your CEO, if that's not you, because, you want to have that rapport.
And can I jump in for a second? Jess just said something. So I get the public service announcements from nearly every government office, including Governor Evers. He'll often announce funding that the states received and/or funding that is in some cases going to other municipalities, which us as a nonprofit, that's not necessarily within our scope. However, it is looking to what's coming to the municipalities that I serve, and can I partner with someone within those municipalities on providing some level of programming. Obviously, it has to be mission specific to our org, but it's still an opportunity. I also wanted to David Miller, I was peeping at the chat. I hope that's okay. He posed a question about the Funding Information Network at Lawrence. It's still available. It's called the FIN. We haven't accessed it in a while because we've just, exhausted it. But I believe you have to go to Mud Library to access it. So you have to use their computers. So it's a little possibly inconvenient in that respect.
Okay, great answers. So I was wondering if each of you could kind of talk about, like, pick your favorite grant and then walk us through the process. So like the writing, the implementing, the managing, and talk a little bit about achieving the goals. And you both kind of talked a little bit about it, but could you tell us a little bit more specifically kind of what your process is? And Jess, if you want to go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. In September, we just applied for, or I applied for the Safer Streets and Roads for All federal grant. And I'm really proud of this one in particular because, first of all, infrastructure is not really my background. I don't know as a lot about how those projects work at like the engineering level, but I don't need to. A grant writer doesn't need to know that. So our process is we saw this funding opportunity come up and it's a lot of money. We applied for $6.8 million and we haven't gotten it or anything yet. So, and we very well might not, but regardless, the process was we saw the funding opportunity. We know we have a need and we think we can make it work. So what I did was pull together a sort of a meeting of everyone who might be knowledgeable or have a role in it. So that included our city engineer, it included our city administrator, our finance director, and myself to talk through what kind of details there are. So the first thing that I usually do is, all right, the grant, I will read through we call it the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And it gives you all of the information on what's eligible, what are the grantors' priorities, because that's critical that you see what they really want to be funding and match your program to it. And if it's not a good fit, then it's not going to be a good fit. But if you can get there, do it. So we'll read through that and then give kind of a synopsis to our group. Here's the grant. Here's what we got to ask. I download the entire application. I don't work right on grants.gov. Don't do that. Just save it to your computer so it's backed up. And then make sure that everybody kind of has a sense of like, what is your role in this process? So sort of like Erin said before, as part of understanding if your organization is set up to actually administer a grant, that is so important. Because if you get the money and you don't spend it properly or you don't do the reporting, it's going to be really, really painful. So by having our finance administrator in the meeting up front or somebody in the finance department who might be helping with keeping up on those reports and knowing like the money that is being spent is coded a certain way so that we can more easily pull invoices, things like that. That's important from the beginning. Our engineer on that team meeting provided kind of a general overview of what the project is. And that's a great place to be able to ask questions from like the grant writer perspective of like, well, how is this going to impact the community? Or, how is this aligned with social justice? I mean, whatever those grantor priorities are in the application, like I'm trying to think of ways to answer questions that would go into a narrative to tie it to those. So that's a great kind of discovery meeting. And then from there we go and get writing on the grant. Maybe the engineer is the one who's working in sort of the project budget. And with that Safer Streets and Roads for All, we actually got partnered with the National League of Cities. They have a program right now where they have some free consultants available, and they were basically there to help proof and provide some just overarching feedback on our project. And that was amazing. And that was a resource we've never really explored before. So I would recommend even like with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities or the national level, reaching out because they were helpful. They kind of helped remind us of deadlines and making sure we're still on it. And they were rooting for us, which was kind of nice to have somebody rooting for us in such like a really giant project. But we ended up having to craft like an entire safety manual to help show like our commitment to safety, even though we're applying for a project that's a road construction project. And I'm just really proud of how it all came together. Federal grants are really complicated and have a lot of components, but we feel really good about what was submitted and how it aligned with their priorities.
Awesome. Erin, same question for you. And then after that, we have a question from the audience.
Sure. So, one of the grants that I'm most proud of having written was within my first 18 months here at SOAR. I was new-ish to the area, especially new to the nonprofit landscape and funding landscape in the area. And from nearly day one was working diligently. Our organization already had a focus, but had been developing a broader focus on providing services to individuals who had survived a traumatic brain injury and their families. It's something that was at the time very, very related to homelessness services and so on and so forth, and basic needs, which is why I'm so proud of it, because SOAR is not known as a basic needs providing organization. Disability services regularly, when you're looking at funder categories to see if you fit within them and funding priorities, disability services aren't often considered basic needs services. So for us to work with the Community Foundation of the Fox Valley region and the Basic Needs Giving Partnership Fund and getting this grant was huge for us. So where it started with me was taking the research that had already been done before I'd come on board, working with my experts that were already on my team, and discussing like where we needed to go, what our first steps were. We also utilized a volunteer organization in the Fox Valley called CI Squared. So it's a group of continuous improvement professionals that have agreed to donate their time to local nonprofits and using lean methodology to kind of project manage and or develop and or strategic plan. We've actually accessed them a couple of times and have some great relationships with some of those lean professionals. So that's where we started developing like our grant plan. And during that time, I reached out to the Community Foundation to develop and enhance our relationship with them. So this is pretty singular to a foundation grant writing experience, and not having a relationship with that fund leader would have absolutely ruined and dashed our chances of receiving a grant. The Basic Needs Giving Partnership grants are fairly competitive in the Fox Valley, and I believe Oshkosh and Green Bay also have BNGP funds within their community foundations. So that was our first step, coming in and having a draft prepared that included, our implementation process, a work plan, our outcomes, how we were going to measure outcomes, tools, and having multiple conversations with that fund leader as to how we were going to accomplish this. There's another resource that I'll also plug. There's something called the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits. They have, there's a link locally through the Fox Valley, through the Nonprofit Leadership Initiative, which is also held at our local community foundation, that, it has an entire grant writing section. Full disclosure, I do believe there's an annual fee associated, especially if you're outside the Valley. But like I said, there's an entire grant writing section, which includes a toolkit, a budget information form, a readiness assessment, literally a checkbox to go through to ensure you are grant ready. You are, following the appropriate steps before you write that grant. So not to divert too much from the process of writing, after meeting with that fund leader, then I went back and I rewrote multiple times. We also had several partners, about 5 partners in this program that we brought to the table and co-wrote. We spent one meeting with the grant up on a big screen talking through the initiatives, outcomes, and making sure that everyone at the table understood their role in the grant, and where our collaboration came in. And then implementation of the grant. So this grant allowed us to hire 1.5 FTE employees. So we had a grant leader or an person to implement the program that we brought on board. And then she had a support employee, and she worked through the work plan in implementing the things that we were going to do with this grant. What's also important is that throughout that time, we kept communication with the community foundation and the fund. And this communication was outside of 6-month or 12-month reports. This was going and getting coffee and talking about how things were going. I can talk about it later, but one of the biggest things I've learned is that make sure you have communication, if you can, with your grantors. And if things are going well, absolutely let them know that. But if they're not going well, you need to let them know that too.
Great answer. And thank you for the resources as well. I know Dr. Larson had put the links to several of the ones that you all have mentioned in the chat as well. So our question from the audience, though, is government grant requests are much more complex than grant requests submitted to foundations. There are a lot of resources available to learn how to write those grants, but how do you learn? How do you learn to write government grants? And I would either of you want to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I experience and working with others who have done it before, I think is a good way to go. If you haven't written one before and you're starting one, like definitely reach out. I mean, you can always reach out to me or to somebody else. I think that helps, because it definitely helps to even just have an outside perspective on, hey, can you log in and take a look at this? Am I missing something? There are a lot of pieces, and it is really easy to miss them. So like when we got partnered up with the National League of Cities, they kind of helped point out a couple of things in the funding opportunity that were kind of just sneaked in there. And like, there were major components that there wasn't a lot of information about them in the opportunity notice. So, I mean, I think just really trying to utilize a network as you get started and really taking the time that's needed. Like a federal grant is not one that I would suggest like trying to crank out in 2 days. Like take the time that you're going to need and make sure that you've literally checked off all of the boxes, because they're so competitive, and they even use computer programs to like scan through the applications to make sure you're hitting certain keywords and phrases. And if you miss a piece of just like you misread the instructions, you're out. So it's really take your time, read it in full, and ask questions of others who who might be filling it out, others who have experience doing it, others who don't have experience but are maybe just really detail oriented and can be like that secondhand person to help you out.
And I'll double down with what Jess said. Find a mentor, if you will. The majority of my state and federal, state grants, government grants, I've been through the Department of Administration, Housing and Urban Development. I worked, prior to SOAR as the executive director of a homeless shelter. So, we worked with HUD and the Department of Administration regularly, and those grants do take a different form. They're typically more structured. And the information that gets presented is less creative, if you will, in some instances. There certainly are narratives, but they often want to know the black and white version of what it is that you're doing, how you're going to do it, and what is going to be the impact of what you're doing. I had the benefit of working with a community action program who roughly 75% of their annual funding was through these sources. So, we had people on staff who had experience. So I was able to talk with them and pull them in. So to that point, knowing where your federal or state or governmental grant is originating from can also be incredibly helpful. I know that sounds really simple, but I've seen some grants that I'm like, I had no idea this was coming from, WEDC. It just happened to come across my desk and I was like, this looks great. And then you realize as you dig deeper that it's not a good fit.
Thank you both. You both kind of touched on this next question with the role of relationships in the grant writing process. So what does that mean in terms of the role of relationships with funders, collaborators, and the community at large? So Erin, go ahead.
Sure. So for us, and for me, funding relationships with the foundations is paramount to getting grants. You know, in the trainings that I've gone through, in the meetings that I've gone through, you know, funders, first of all, funders need to give away the money that they have to give away. I mean, they're legally obligated to give away a portion of what they have from the foundation perspective. That's not universal, but foundation perspective. So having relationships with those fund leaders, having relationships with the staff at the foundations, within the companies. I mean, it's paramount, because through those relationships is how you learn what their priorities are. And it's how you learn how you might be able to fit within their priorities. And it's how you learn what an appropriate ask might be to them. Through the development of a relationship with a local funder, we've literally had a funder say, "You don't ask enough and you don't ask for enough." And we were like, "Oh, okay." Well received. You know, we hear you loud and clear. We're happy to do that. And that's because we have a strong relationship with them. So, you know, and then the other relationship is with collaborators. Collaborators are incredibly important, because as cheesy as it might sound, like we are better together, and it's simply not a good use of resources to duplicate services. So if you are doing something similar or related to something that someone else is doing, you should chat with them about how you guys can plug together, because quite possibly you can extend your reach while being a responsible fiscally responsibly using resources. From our perspective and within the Valley, I also know that funders will ask you, and any place else that I've worked in the state, they're pretty clear about, well, who are your partners in this?
Yeah, I'll echo, the relationships are key. I mean, every day there is some type of touch point with somebody locally, especially, that's like, we want to keep in touch. So there's a particular person in West Bend who oversees a major foundation, and he's just really well known. And we do whatever we can to just keep a super positive relationship. He might reach out to us asking, like, you know, what are some good funding opportunities in the city? It might not be the city or our projects, might be some organizations or things like that. So like being able to know kind of what's happening and you know, what's worth supporting, what's an organization in the community that's like, hey, they got a really good cause, they got a big project, they need some money, and they're actually going to be able to do it. They have the ability to do a grant. Like the funder appreciates those kind of relationships and that knowledge. So we're always trying to be like having a dialogue somehow. And it's not just about us and our programs. It's kind of like, what's going on? What's the pulse? And then we also invite them in. So like, if we're looking ahead to a major project that's coming in a year or 2 years or something, we're going to try to like bring in those leaders, those community leaders and other organizations to be kind of like visionary, and kind of have that buy-in, because especially at that local level, if some of the funders already have like a personal buy-in to the project and an interest in it, they are going to push it through at that funding level when it's time to apply. And that's been like time and time again the case. At the state level, we've been doing some kind of, I think it's been really fun, but we've been just really trying to be active with inviting those who are putting out these major grants this last year, especially, to come and like see the project at work. So when we received the Neighborhood Investment Fund grant, which was through the Department of Administration, we invited like everyone to come anytime they wanted and like tried to reach out. We even did a little bit of lobbying for that grant, where we worked with like our local representatives, like, hey, if you have a connection there, like any good words you could give, like this would be transformational to our community. We don't really know if it was our amazing grant writing skills or if it was like just the relationships that got that through. It was just like a mixture of everything. But we've been really deliberate in reaching out to like the Department of Administration, saying like, hey, Secretary Blumenfeld, we'd like you to come and see what is happening. And she did. And she brought her team and she was like, you know what, so-and-so should come. And so we're like, great, we'll invite them too. So like secretary of the DNR came to see this crazy road we built in the Riverwalk that they had approved, and we had to work with the DNR. But like those relationships really matter. And so we take them really seriously. And so I'll attend, I recently attended the WEDC, like Wisconsin Economic Development Summit. It was up in Appleton. It was like the first time they've had it. And like attending a conference like that is like, it's great for your own personal growth and knowledge, but it's also an opportunity to get in front of the people, these people, and the ones that like we never see them, but they're sitting at a table like right next to you. Like go up and say hello and thank you for the grant, or thank you for at least funding a grant. Maybe you didn't get it, but thanks, we threw our hat in. We'd love to invite you to our community or our organization so you can kind of see what we do. And they're just regular people. They just have big titles, and they do come. So that's been really fun.
So, Jess, I'll ask you this question to start off with, but what are some of the obstacles that you've faced within your grant seeking, writing, managing career?
Yeah, I would say it's a couple things. I mean, resources and just the ability to actually write a grant well and have the time and like brain power to do it. I find that it's really hard sometimes to keep up with a deadline that's coming, and we've got 500 other projects going on. It's like, I know I got to crank this grant out. So it ends up being that it might be in the middle of the night that I'm writing it, because it's the only time that's alone and I can focus, because you do need a fair amount of like dedicated headspace to write something really well. At least I do. And so that might be blocking out we have shared calendars at the city. And so like pretty much everybody here can see my calendar, and I'll say like grant writing, I'm out of the office, or I'm got my door closed. And like, I think, for the most part, people understand like you just need that time. So it is hard to make it though. And also like the resource staff wise, like I'm writing grants for engineering, but I don't work in engineering. So like if they had somebody on their team, that might be great, but unrealistic for our organization. We're smaller. And so if we had more resources, then maybe we would have a full-time grant writer, but we don't. So we just make it work. And so that means maybe sometimes we leave opportunities on the door, and we can't get to them, which is a bummer. But so that would pretty much be it. Resources and just the time and like dedication it really takes to do a quality application.
Erin, same question.
Absolutely same, mirroring Jess, time, resources, brain power. It does to write a well-written grant. It takes mental energy. And that can be tough to allocate out when you're already so busy doing a lot of things. We have a shared schedule amongst our office. We also work in a hybrid setting. So often, I take my time out of the office to write. We do also, one resource we have is a grant writer on staff. Part of her role is grant writing. The other part of her role is fundraising management. So we toggle back and forth on who's writing what grant, when it's getting written. Often we're both writing, we're both reviewing, so we use the resource in each other. So those are some of the biggest things. Another one that I have experienced in having kind of left one human service industry and entering another industry within human services is just the funding niches that exist. I referenced basic needs funding earlier, and having worked in crisis services, like crisis services are lumped into basic needs categories often, or they're called out in whatever is the most, the biggest need in that moment. So mental health funding opportunities are primary right now following COVID. But figuring out where disability services fall within that, it's something that we've talked about at a board level and at a strategic level, and also at a funding level locally, with our funding leaders to say, some of our services are actually basic needs. They just don't take the same tone and outcome as, say, a homeless shelter. So, for example, you cannot cure disabilities. You cannot get rid of disabilities. You can't do that. What you can do is help someone be their most independent and help them achieve their full potential. Whereas homelessness, you can solve homelessness. You can create a world where no one is living on the streets or homeless. So sometimes that paradigm shift is tough for funders, and it's tough to figure out sometimes where we fit in. But I'll bring it back full circle to the relationship question. It's about relationships. There's another question about storytelling, and it's also about storytelling and how well you do that.
Awesome. Thank you both. So moving on, we're going to go with some of the mistakes that people should avoid. What are some tips from your experience that should be avoided when grant seeking and writing? Jess, go ahead.
Some mistakes. Well, definitely not reading the instructions. It like brings me back to third grade when I like wanted to race through a project. Then you get to the end, it's like this trick question. It's like you should have read the instructions, and kind of a reminder, because seriously, it's all about the instructions, the grant priorities. Does it match your project? Even small grant, big grant. If you don't read the instructions, if you miss the deadline, you're done. You don't, attach all of the documents as they specifically want them. It's out. Like, it is really competitive, but you can do it. So it's just really taking the time to read the instructions, be sure that you're submitting a complete application. If they say something is optional, and you have it, or you have it started, like, finish it and include it. Because really, if you can provide as much information about your need in your project, do it. And if they're providing you with an opportunity to add more, then add more if it's going to help. So that's one thing that we do. And then I would say, like, a big mistake is like applying for something that's just like, it's not a good fit. I mean, you're never going to get a grant if you don't apply. So of course, like, do it. But I guess be mindful that if your project just really isn't a good fit for something, like, is it worth your time and energy? Like, could you work to find something better, or could you build a better relationship with someone else, or find another way? But I mean, that's how it is. And then also one good reminder, because this happened to me not long ago, because I had to get a new computer, is make sure that you're backing everything up. I typically work everything on a network that's backed up all the time. But sometimes with grant writing, you want to just take your computer and go and be away and store it on that desktop, and just make sure you're backing everything up. Sounds basic.
Yeah, Erin, go ahead.
And I'll reiterate, back everything up. I had a computer crash once, and that was not a pleasant couple of days. But a few kind of ditto to a few things. I know this is going to sound counterintuitive, but don't chase the money. Especially in the nonprofit sector, if it is going to cause mission stray, or if it's just not a great fit for your organization in the capacity that you have, it's not going to be a good experience. So do everything that you can to just not simply chase that. Develop relationships in every situation that you can. Know everything that the RFP has, or read every single thing that is released in that grant package, including the FAQ. This is a personal experience where we did not read the FAQ. We did read the entire RFP, and per the RFP felt as though we were eligible, but did not read the FAQ. And in the FAQ, we were very blatantly not eligible. So we put in a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of work, and really, frankly, kind of wasted some resources in applying for this grant. And then lastly, always, if you can, ask for feedback on a declined grant. Seek the feedback of that grantor as to why they opted to not fund your program. It's great feedback on your writing. It's great feedback on the relationship, and it gives you that touch point to further develop the relationship. I will always, whenever I can, and even sometimes when I'm not sure who I'm asking, I will ask why they chose not to fund our initiative.
Oh, I have one more thing to add too. And I agree. We do the same with the ask why not, and set up like a phone call like a few weeks later or something, like, could you walk us through it? It also helps you build the relationship with them for the next time. One thing that I would say is, do not guess on your budget numbers. Try to get as accurate as possible. When I first came into this role, there was a major grant that was it was awarded and the project was like partway underway. And like, I don't know how the budget was determined. It was like some kind of really, really broad estimate. And I get like a lot of times you're not at a point where you're going to know everything. And the grantor knows that too. Sometimes there's a question like, how solid is this budget? And you might say like it's 60% or it's 80% or like we've already gone to bid. But like this one was really off and it was off on the categories we said we were going to spend it in. We spent like significantly more money, but in different categories, and just like created so many headaches to come in and have to figure out how can we still get this funding because we still really desperately need it, especially since we went way over on the project, but like it doesn't match what our contract says. So it is a process. Thankfully, that was like a WEDC grant, and they were very willing to like go through and make sure what was eligible, what wasn't, and actually do an amendment to our contract. But just like save yourself the headache and like really be sure you're asking or you're understanding like how solid are these numbers? Are we going to hit them? Are we over? Are we under? Like be as accurate as you can.
Great.
And I'll add on top of that, as from the nonprofit, from any perspective, really know the true cost of the service that you're providing and what you're writing that grant for. I mean, that's a whole nother like session, I feel like, in developing that. But if you know that true cost, then you know, or you have more information to make a more informed ask.
Thank you. Those are all really great tips. We do have another question from the audience, and this person said it would be nice to have such organizational resources in writing grants like Jessica and Erin seem to have. What about us little guys with only 2 staff on board? Any suggestions, or do we have to do it all? Whoever wants to answer that can go for it.
Well, either way is fine. I've been a part of small organizations and large, and like, even though we have a lot of employees, it kind of feels like a one-person show sometimes with the grants. And so like, I think you have to just be able to bite off what you can chew. It's really hard to see opportunities pass you by, but sometimes you just can't do it. We have recently started thinking like, hey, we really need to just either start working into a grant, like administrative costs for like a consultant to help like manage the grant. And if we get it, then we're covered. And if we don't get it, then we won't hire that person. Sometimes they'll allow you to do that. We had a lady that recently retired who partnered with me on the Riverwalk grant, and she's really knowledgeable and willing to kind of like maybe do some one-off projects. And so if you have some resources available to maybe have somebody super part-time on the side, knock out a couple like smaller grants you see come through, I would recommend that. But it's really tough, and it can be really tough with a small crew. So I guess it's kind of making sure you're prioritizing, you're going for those grants that you feel like are the best possible opportunity that go with your project, where you would have the most likeliness of getting it, to make it worthwhile.
I'll add on top of that about the prioritization. So in my role immediately prior to SOAR, when I started there, I was the only full-time employee as the executive director. So I was doing grant writing, I was researching the grants, chief cook and bottle washer again. So it's about prioritization, and it's about really developing a good sense of what your capacity is. And then if you have the opportunity, right sizing to the capacity that you want to be or need to be in order to have more effective operations. That's a conversation that we're having right now, is, right sizing. So right sizing for growth, right sizing for grant opportunities. It's hard. I can 100% empathize with you, because there's lots of nights I spent at midnight writing a grant. Once I had to write a grant when I had pneumonia, so I couldn't even go into the office. It's not easy.
Great answer. We are starting to come upon our time here, our time to end, but I just want to throw it out there. If anyone in the audience, anyone else has any questions for Jess and Erin, please put it in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand and unmute yourself. Okay, we have one here. What is a reasonable hit ratio for success on these type of grants? And Erin, if you want to answer that question first.
When you say these type of grants, just clarification, like foundation grants or government grants?
Yeah, I guess broadly, any type that you work with. What I'm really trying to get at is if people are going to be pursuing these types of things, should they be discouraged when they're getting a lot of rejections? I mean, what's the reasonable expectation?
Certainly. So I've heard actually a really broad range of what's a reasonable expectation. I've heard as low as don't expect to get over 30% of your grants. I've heard someone say don't expect to get more than 50% of your grants that you apply for. I've never calculated my hit ratio, so I don't know what it is. I do know that in my lifetime, there have been about 5 grants that have got declined that I have been like heartbroken about, that I didn't get them, so they resonated with me. But I would say somewhere, like that 30% or less, like that 30% is a great hit ratio. If you have a ratio of over 50%, like you're phenomenally doing something right. My guess is you're going to have really great relationships with your foundation or whomever you're writing those grants to.
Yeah, I would say it really, like, for us depends on like the type of funding we're going after. So if it's local funding, I feel like our ratio is much higher because we have those relationships. We're in direct communication with the funders compared to like federal level. It's like, I mean, we don't know anyone, So like when you're competing against everyone in every project in every major city, and some of those people have federal relationships, so yeah, our expectations are in check when it comes to grants like that. I try not to get my hopes up too hard, even though there's so much work. But those local ones, I think our ratio is like so much higher. And that can be kind of devastating if you don't get one that you're like really banking on, like, I know we're going to get this. And, so you got to keep your expectations in line. And then, do that follow-up, like, especially the local ones, like if you don't get it, like, what did I miss? Or like, what was missing? But I don't know, for us, the ratio is like probably the highest at the local, and then next is state or WEDC level. And then, federal is shooting for the stars, right? And that might be reflective too on the amount of money you're asking for. I don't know. I would say those go up based on that too.
Awesome. Well, I know we're a little over on time, so I want to respect everybody's time. If you guys do have questions, Jess and Erin, if you guys wouldn't mind like putting, I guess, your contact information in the chat. If people do have questions, if you're cool with that, feel free to forward them on to Dr. Larson and Dr. Ford or our Whitburn Center email. We'll be sure to get them to them. This was great. Really enjoyed the conversation. And we just want to invite all of you to our next Whitburn Wednesday event, which is going to be held on December 14th. And it's going to be a presentation from the MPA graduating students this fall semester on their capstone project. So you'll get to kind of see the highlighted projects of some of us students graduating and what we've been working on. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. Jess, Erin, really appreciate all of the really good insight. And I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.